30 days, and over 60 approaches. But by day 12, something happened that I genuinely did not see coming, and it had nothing to do with the women I was talking to. You see, I've been sitting on this for a while because I wanted to make sure I understood it before I said anything. But now that I do, everything about how I used to think about this is different. By the end of this video, so will you. But let me take you back to day one, because day one didn't go the way I planned, and honestly, looking back, it couldn't have, because I wasn't ready in the way I thought I was ready. But I'd done the reading, I'd watched the videos, I had a loose idea of what I was gonna say and how I was gonna say it. But what I didn't have is what no amount of preparation can actually give you. It's the experience of standing 3 feet from a woman you find attractive, with no script in your hand and no exit strategy, and actually opening your mouth. So there I was, Tuesday morning, a girl sitting alone at a small table outside a cafe, one earbud in, coffee going cold next to her phone. She looked relaxed, approachable, the kind of situation every approach guide tells you is a green light, and I walked toward her, genuinely. I took 4 steps in her direction, and then something inside me invented a reason to keep walking. I told myself she was probably waiting for someone. I told myself the timing was off. I walked straight past her, turned a corner, stood there for a second, and felt something I think most men know, but almost nobody talks about honestly. The specific shame of talking yourself out of something you actually wanted to do. That feeling, that's not fear of rejection, that's something deeper, and it took me almost 2 full weeks to understand what it actually was. But before I get into that, if you've ever been in a situation where you genuinely couldn't tell what a woman was thinking, whether she was interested, just being friendly, or playing something you didn't fully understand, I wrote a book specifically for that. It's called The Truth Detector, first link in the description, because what I found over these 30 days is that approaching is only half the problem. Reading what's actually happening after you approach is where most men fall completely apart. But we'll get to that. Right now, let's stay on day one, because the mistake I made that morning wasn't the one I thought it was. I assumed the problem was courage, just needed more of it. Push through the discomfort, say something, anything, and the rest would follow. So on day 2, I forced it. Girl browsing in a bookstore, quiet aisle, easy environment. I walked up, said something about the book in her hand. She smiled. We talked. It lasted maybe 2 minutes, and it was fine. Nothing special, but fine. I walked away feeling like I'd cracked something open. Then day 3 came, and day 4. But what started happening confused me completely, because some conversations flowed easily and some died in under 30 seconds, and I couldn't figure out what the difference was. Same opener, same environment, but completely different results. So I started filming myself. Not the women, just my own face, my body, my energy before and after each approach. And when I watched the footage back that night, I saw something that stopped me cold. The difference wasn't what I was saying. It wasn't even how I was saying it. It was something happening before I said a single word. Something in the 10 seconds before I opened my mouth that was either setting the whole thing up or quietly killing it before it started. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. There's actually a name for what I was watching. Psychologists who study nonverbal behavior, including work built on Paul Ekman's research on microexpressions, talk about how the body broadcasts internal state faster than the brain can manage it. You can choose your words. You cannot fully choose what your face and posture are doing in the half second before you speak. And women, whether consciously or not, are reading that signal before you've said anything at all. So the opener genuinely doesn't matter as much as every guide claims, because by the time your mouth opens, she's already formed an impression. The question is what impression you're giving off in those silent seconds. And most men have no idea. But what was I broadcasting in that footage? And what changed when I finally fixed it? Listen, I want you to really picture this, because you've probably done the same thing without realizing it. Every time an approach went badly, there was a moment, maybe 5-6 seconds before I walked up, where my eyes would drop, just slightly, and my shoulders would do this almost invisible thing where they'd pull forward, like my body was trying to make itself smaller before entering a situation it wasn't sure about. It was subtle enough that I hadn't noticed it in real time, but on camera, it was undeniable. I was shrinking before I even arrived. arrived. But every time an approach went well, none of that. I'd walk up the same way I was already walking. No adjustment, no preparation, just continuation, like she was simply the next thing in a day that was already going fine. That's when it clicked. The guys who are naturally good at this aren't doing something special when they approach. They're doing nothing. No extra confidence, no calculated body language, no rehearsed energy. They're just not subtracting. They're not shrinking. The approach is just a continuation of who they already were 10 seconds before it happened. So the real question isn't how do you perform better in the approach, it's how do you become someone who doesn't feel the need to perform at all. But that question took me into week 2, and week 2 was brutal. Look, I want to be honest about something because I think most guys who document challenges like this quietly skip over it. There were days in week 2 when I didn't want to do this anymore, not because of any single rejection. I'd gotten used to those faster than I expected, which is itself something worth talking about, but because of a specific kind of tired that accumulates when you're emotionally exposed every single day. You're putting yourself in front of strangers, being evaluated in real time, and carrying every interaction home with you whether you want to or not. It adds up, and by day 10, I was running on empty in a way that was starting to show up in the approaches themselves. But here's why that matters. Roy Baumeister's research on self-regulation, the same body of work that shaped how modern psychology thinks about willpower, found that emotional effort draws from the same internal resource as every other form of mental output, which means when you're depleted, everything suffers. Your presence drops, your reactions get slightly slower. The natural, fluid version of you that shows up when you're relaxed and unguarded, he goes quiet, and what's left is a more mechanical, more desperate version that women can sense instantly, even if they can't explain why. So I was doing more approaches but getting worse results, and I couldn't figure out why until I stopped treating this like a volume game and started treating it like a recovery game. What changed things was almost embarrassingly simple. I stopped going out to approach. I started going out to be out, to walk around, grab a coffee, exist in a space without any agenda attached to it. And if I felt like talking to someone, I would. If I didn't, I wouldn't. No quota, no pressure, no internal scorecard running in the background. And within 2 days of doing that, something in the quality of my interactions shifted completely. Because here's the thing about pressure that nobody explains properly. Pressure doesn't just affect how you feel, it changes what you're actually focused on. When you walk into a room thinking, I need to approach someone today, your attention goes inward. You're monitoring yourself. You're watching your own performance like a nervous director standing just off stage. But the second you let go of the outcome, your attention shifts outward, to her, to the actual conversation, to what's happening in real time rather than what you're afraid might happen. It's the difference between talking to someone and being present with someone. And it turns out those are two very different experiences to be on the receiving end of. By day 14, I was having conversations that felt genuinely easy in a way the first week never did. Not because I'd gotten better at lines or structure or technique, but because I'd stopped treating every interaction like an audition. But then day 15 happened, and it threw me completely. A girl at a bookstore, which seems to be my place apparently, mid-20s, reading the back of something in the philosophy section, completely unbothered by the world. I walked up feeling as relaxed as I'd been in 2 weeks. Said something easy, something honest, nothing calculated. She lit up. We talked for maybe 20 minutes. At some point we moved from the philosophy section to the window seats near the front of the store. She was laughing. I was laughing. By any visible metric, this was going exactly the way you'd want it to go. And then she said she had to leave, gave me a warm smile and walked out. No number, no suggestion of staying in touch, just gone. And I stood there genuinely confused because nothing in the interaction suggested it was ending that way. Everything she did pointed somewhere else. Her body language, her eye contact, the way she kept extending the conversation every time there was a natural pause. All of it said one thing, the ending said another. But that gap between what a woman shows you and what she actually means is something I'd been running into since day one without a framework to understand it. And the guys who consistently get results aren't just better at approaching, they're better at reading. They know what signals actually mean versus what they appear to mean on the surface. That's a skill I had to build fast, and if you want a shortcut to understanding it, that's exactly what the truth detector breaks down. first link in the description, because going into the second half of this challenge without being able to read what was actually happening was like trying to navigate with a map that only showed half the city. But what I figured out next, without the book, the hard way, surprised me more than anything else in 30 days. By week 3, I had a theory, and the theory was this: the men who are consistently attractive to women aren't necessarily the best looking, the most successful, or even the most confident in the traditional sense. They're the most self-contained. There's a version of a man that walks into any environment and doesn't need anything from it, doesn't need the room to validate him, doesn't need the conversation to go a certain way, doesn't need her to respond how he hopes she will. And that absence of need, that quiet completeness, is more magnetic than any opener ever written. I know that sounds almost too simple, but watch what it looks like in practice. Day 17, a girl waiting alone at a bus stop, sunglasses on, bag over one shoulder. I walked over, stood nearby, and said something casual about how long the bus had been running late. No agenda behind it. Genuinely just said a thing. She laughed, said she'd been waiting 20 minutes, and the conversation moved from there naturally. 5 minutes later, I had her number and we were still talking. The bus came and she almost didn't get on. Now here's what I want you to notice, because this is the part that matters. I didn't do anything special in that interaction. I didn't use a technique. I didn't run a structure. I just talked to her the same way I talk to anyone. The difference was internal. I wasn't waiting to see how she'd respond before deciding how to feel about the conversation. I wasn't monitoring her reactions to calibrate my next move. I was just there, fully there. And that quality, just being fully present without needing anything back, is something women pick up on at a level they can't always articulate but absolutely feel. Robert Cialdini spent years studying the psychology of influence and persuasion, his work ultimately becoming the foundation of his book Influence, which has shaped how everyone from marketers to world leaders think about human behavior. And one of the things that runs through his research like a thread is this: people are drawn to what feels scarce and repelled by what feels desperate, not because they're cruel, because desperation signals imbalance, and imbalance at a primal level reads as instability. So when you walk up to a woman quietly needing her to like you, she senses the imbalance before your second sentence, and something in her pulls back, not because of you specifically, but because of what that energy communicates. Flip it. Walk up needing nothing. Now you're the scarce thing. Now she's the one doing the calibrating. But here's where I have to be honest with you, because I think a lot of content around this topic skips over something important, and it ends up leaving men more confused than when they started. Not needing anything doesn't mean not caring. That distinction matters more than I can overstate, because somewhere along the line, the self-improvement space took "don't be desperate" and quietly twisted it into "be detached, be aloof, be unavailable, make her chase." And I tried that version in week 1. Day 5 specifically, walked into an interaction with this kind of manufactured coolness, slightly distant, deliberately hard to read. And you know what happened? She lost interest in under 90 seconds. Not because women don't appreciate a challenge, they do, but because there's a massive difference between a man who is genuinely full and a man who is performing emptiness. One feels like depth, the other feels like nothing's home. The version that actually works is warmth with no need attached, genuine interest with no desperation underneath it. You actually like talking to people. You're just not going to collapse if this particular person doesn't like talking to you back. And holding both of those things at the same time is harder than it sounds. It took me until week 3 to stop confusing the two. Day 21. Halfway through week 3, and I decided to try something different. Instead of approaching with an observation or a comment, I just asked a direct question, not a pickup line, an actual question. She was looking at a menu outside a restaurant, clearly deciding something. I walked up and said, honestly, that I couldn't decide either, and asked what she was thinking. It sounds almost too simple, but what happened next taught me more about attraction than almost any other approach in 30 days. She answered. We debated the menu for a few minutes. Then she said, completely unprompted, "Are you eating here alone?" I said I was. She paused, this specific pause that felt loaded in a way I'd learned to recognize by now, and said, "Me too, actually." And we ended up eating lunch together for an hour. No technique, no script, just a real question that created a real conversation that gave her enough information to make her own decision. And that That last part is something I want to sit on for a second because I think it reframes this entire topic. Most men approach trying to convince, trying to impress, trying to manufacture a specific outcome through the right combination of words and energy and timing. But the men who consistently get results aren't convincing anyone of anything. They're just giving women enough of a clear, honest picture of who they actually are and then letting the woman decide. The approach isn't a performance, it's an introduction, and there's a version of you that, if she could just see it clearly, without all the noise, the nervousness, the performance, the need, she'd probably like. The whole game is just learning to get out of your own way long enough for that version to show up. By day 23, I thought I'd figured most of this out. I thought I understood what I was doing and why it was working. I was wrong, and day 24 proved it in a way I didn't see coming. Day 24 started fine. Better than fine, actually. I was in a good headspace, the kind that had been producing solid interactions all week. I approached a girl at a farmer's market, easy environment, relaxed atmosphere, natural conversation starters everywhere. She was friendly. We talked for a few minutes. I got her number. By any measure, a good approach. I walked away feeling solid. Then I approached a second girl 20 minutes later. Same energy, same presence, same version of me that had just gotten the number. And she was cold, not rude, just completely uninterested in a way that was obvious within the first 30 seconds. I wrapped it up, moved on. Fine. Rejection is part of this. Third approach, an hour later. Coffee shop, girl alone at a table, no headphones, all the signals that say approachable. It crashed before it started. She gave me a polite but closed answer and went back to her phone. And I felt something I hadn't felt since week one, that familiar unsteadiness, that internal wobble where one bad interaction starts bleeding into how you carry yourself into the next one. But here's what was actually happening, and this is the thing I wish someone had told me on day one. Your state is not as stable as you think it is, and the longer you're out, the more vulnerable it becomes to what's happening around you. 1 rejection, fine. 2, manageable. 3 in a row on the same afternoon in the same headspace you'd been winning from all week. That starts to quietly rewrite the story you're telling yourself. And the story you're telling yourself is the single most powerful variable in this entire equation. Not your looks, not your opener, not the environment, the internal narrative running in the background of every single interaction. That's what's actually driving everything. Because here's what happened on approach number 4 that afternoon. I walked up to a girl near a bookstore. At this point, I'm convinced bookstores are following me, and before I even said anything, I could feel the residue of the last 3 interactions sitting on me like dead weight. I was approaching from a deficit, not desperate, not nervous in the obvious way, but just slightly off. Slightly smaller than I'd been that morning, and she felt it. The conversation lasted 90 seconds. She was polite about it, but it was over before it started. 4 in a row, and I almost went home. But instead, I sat down, bought a coffee, opened my notes, and went back through everything I'd written since day 1, and I started noticing a pattern I hadn't seen clearly until that moment, because it's the kind of thing that's invisible when you're inside it and obvious the second you step back. Every time I had a strong run of good interactions, it wasn't because I'd gotten better at approaching. It was because something in my life, outside of the approaches, was going well. I'd slept properly. I'd trained that morning. I'd had a good conversation with a friend, or finished something I was proud of, or eaten well, or simply spent enough time alone to feel like myself again before I went out into the world. The approaches were just the output. Everything else was the input. And every time I hit a wall, every time the interactions felt hollow or forced or just slightly off, I could trace it back to the same thing. I was showing up empty and expecting the approaches to fill me up. I was treating external validation like a fuel source. And the brutal truth about external validation as a fuel source is that it burns out fast and leaves you more depleted than before. This is something the psychologist Abraham Maslow understood decades ago when he drew the distinction between people who are internally motivated, driven by something that lives inside them, versus people who need external feedback to feel okay. The second type isn't weaker or worse. They're just running on an unreliable power source, and in the context of approaching women, that unreliability shows up in real time, in every interaction, in ways you can't fully hide. So, what do you do about it? How do you actually build the kind of internal stability that doesn't collapse under 3 back-to-back rejections on a Tuesday afternoon? I spent the last week of this challenge testing the answer to that question, and what I found was both simpler and harder than anything I tried in the first 3 weeks. Week 4, the final push, and I changed one thing. I stopped measuring success by how the woman responded. Completely. The new metric was simple. Did I approach? Yes or no? That's the whole scorecard. If I walked up and said something genuine and she wasn't interested, that's a 10 out of 10. The outcome became completely irrelevant to how I felt about the interaction. And what that did, almost immediately, was take the emotional stakes out of every single approach. Think about what actually makes approaching feel dangerous. It's not the conversation, it's the judgment attached to the outcome. You approach, she's not interested, and somewhere in your brain that gets logged as evidence of something. Evidence that you're not enough, that you read the situation wrong, that you should have stayed where you were. The rejection isn't painful because of her. It's painful because of the story you attach to it. Strip the story away and what's left? A conversation that didn't go anywhere. That's it. That's the whole thing. By day 26, I was approaching with a lightness I hadn't felt at any point in the first 3 weeks. Not because I'd stopped caring, I still wanted the interactions to go well, but the caring was clean. It wasn't attached to my self-worth anymore. And that one shift produced more genuine, natural, attractive interactions in the final 6 days than the first 24 combined. But then came day 28. A girl at a gallery, standing in front of a piece that looked like someone had thrown paint at a wall and called it intentional. I walked up next to her, looked at it for a moment, and said quietly that I'd been staring at it for 2 minutes, trying to figure out if I was supposed to feel something. She burst out laughing, said she'd been standing there for the same reason. We spent the next 40 minutes walking through the gallery together, arguing pleasantly about what counted as art and what counted as a cry for help. She texted me that evening, but I didn't do anything impressive. I was just honest, present, unbothered by whether it was going to work. And it worked. So here's what 30 days actually taught me, and I want to say this clearly because I think it's the thing that gets buried under all the tactics and techniques and frameworks that get thrown at men who are trying to figure this out. The goal was never to get better at approaching women. The goal, the real one, underneath all of it, was to become someone who didn't need the approach to go well in order to feel okay. Because that man, the one who is genuinely fine either way, is the most attractive version of himself by default. Not because he's performing anything, because he's not performing anything. And everything that reads as confidence, as presence, as attractive energy, all of it is just what's left when the need for approval gets quiet enough to stop running the show. That's what changed on day 12. Not a technique, not a strategy. The noise got quiet, and what was underneath it surprised me. But if any part of this challenge made you realize you've been running the same pattern, approaching from need, measuring yourself by outcomes, shrinking before you even arrive, then the truth detector is the next step. It's the first link in the description. It takes everything underneath this video and goes deeper, so you're not just approaching better, you're actually understanding what's happening in real time on both sides of the conversation. 30 days, over 60 approaches, and the most important thing I learned had nothing to do with women. It had everything to do with finally meeting the version of me that didn't need their approval to show up. You don't find that version by reading about him. You find him by walking up anyway, especially on the days you don't feel ready, especially then. But YouTube somehow thinks you really should watch this video next, so click now and I'll see you there.